I'd like to talk to you a little bit about where you grew up. You were how old on the kinder transport? 13?
12.
12? Okay, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about growing up, where you grew up, a little bit about your family, and then we'll talk about the actual transport and what brought you to Tennessee.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, okay.
So tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Essen, Germany. Essen is kind of the Pittsburgh of Germany, big ironworks and the famous Krupp works. And it was a city maybe of 600, 700,000 people. My father was a lawyer. My mother was a housewife. I had a brother, older brother, who was born in 1921. I was born in 1926. I started school just when Hitler came into power, 1933, yeah. And went to a public school, but it was a Jewish school in Germany. The state supported religious affiliated schools. And I don't think it had much to do with Jewish religion. It was just a grade school, right? Yes, right. And then when I guess maybe in the 4th grade, you instead of continuing in the public school, you could choose to go to the gymnasium, high school directed toward people who were growing into the middle class. And that's where I went. But after, I think, even the first year in 1936, the so-called Nuremberg laws came in, and the Jewish kids could no longer go to such a school. So
Let me stop you right there. Tell me about that.
Yeah.
You were old enough to understand what was happening.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think was going on?
Well, I remember being a first grader or so when the Nazis, stormtroopers, brown shirts had their parade. It was fun to watch it. And when, this is as a 6-year-old, when a stormtrooper came along and greeted you with Heil Hitler, you thought it was fun to respond with the Heil Hitler salute. Now that was, when I was very young. By the time I was in the gymnasium, the protocol was when the teacher came in the morning, children would rise from their desks and give the Heil Hitler salute. But as a Jewish student, I rose as students for generations had done in the German school, this discipline. We stood up without giving a Hitler salute. So it was, immediately you were segregated, as it were. But this didn't go on for long because I was kicked out and went back to the Jewish school and continued there until...
How old at this time?
I'm sorry?
What grade were you in?
This would be 4th, 5th grade.
And you didn't give the Heil Hitler salute?
No. Right.
The other kids did?
Oh, yes.
And you didn't?
In the Jewish school, of course, there was no Hitler. The faculty was, the teachers were Jewish, and so this is what happened in the gymnasium.
Right. Okay, I got you. I understand that.
I guess gymnasium is like private school. I think probably parents had to pay tuition. And that's where middle-class kids ended up, who weren't going to be plumbers and carpenters and the like. I mean, the German system, you know, they had an apprentice system for workmen, for blue-collar workers who went to school until the 8th grade, then got out and went into apprenticeship.
Had your parents talked to you about what was going on?
Oh, I think it was, you couldn't escape it, right? I mean, there were some, I mean, remember, yeah, I mean, everywhere were the signs which said Jews not desired. You couldn't go to movies, public parks, swimming pools. I mean, the Jewish community was really ghettoized in some sense, although they didn't live in a ghetto. I mean, you know, we lived in a middle-class neighborhood where but you know, this is Germany in 1936. Although my father was a successful attorney, we didn't have a car. We rode the streetcar wherever we went or walked. It's hard to imagine today, but there were sidewalks, right? And the like. I remember, you know, very, you know, I was part of the Maccabi Hatzair, which was the Jewish Boy Scouts run through the Jewish Center. But I have the memory, you know, I remember some friends. My grandfather, on my mother's side, had a store in a suburb of Essen where we lived. And it was a houseware store on the first floor and a toy store on the second floor. And so in addition to being able to play on Sundays on the second floor in the toy store, I also had nice toys at home, beautiful toys, soldiers marching, clay soldiers, all that sort of stuff. No pistols, as far as I know, no guns, but, and I think I enjoyed the soldiers more parading than engaging in war. So I think I had a bicycle and you know, some friends with which most Jewish friends, and we played. I still remember one of my friends who even remember his birthday date. But when I was in Israel, I looked up and discovered he too did not survive World War II. This friend was had a father who still had his German military uniform from World War I and was very proud. The father was very proud of his German, you know, his, how does one say it? He was German nationalist. And, you know, my father also had been drafted in World War I, but he was a Zionist from the turn of the century. He was born in 1880, so he was there when the Zionist movement came into being. And he was an enthusiastic follower, which many German Jews, of course, were not, including this, my friend's father, who thought, you know, his place was in Germany. And so that was, you know, as in this country. I mean, there were many Jews in the 1930s who had nothing to do with Zionism.
how do you think, your father's sense of dedication to the Zionists helped you, the better understanding of what was happening, a little bit more?
Well, we certainly were aware of Israel. In fact, my parents, in 1935, took a trip to Palestine with a view toward seeing if that was a place they could emigrate to. It was an orientation trip, so I was certainly aware of what was going on. The kids, of course, stayed at home. They went. My father at the time, in 1935, was 55 years old, discovered that there was nothing there for him to do. It was agriculture. My father was a lawyer. He was not physically strong. He was 5'2" tall. And they came back and discovered that Palestine was not an alternative for them. And so in 1936, my older brother came to Nashville with my father. My father brought him to Nashville to live with his brother, Robert, who was married to a woman who was a native to Nashville, and they had no children of their own. So my brother, in 1936, a 15-year-old, was sent off. My father brought him to Nashville. My father was treated as, very well by the Jewish community, as a distinguished German attorney. But at the same time, the Germans, this is now no longer allowed lawyers to practice. The professions were not allowed to continue.
How did you make a living after that?
From savings.
Savings.
Yes, I mean, yes. I mean, I didn't recognize anywhere. In fact, the idea was my father came to America to bring my brother, stayed here for 4 weeks, came back, although the immigration authorities had some doubts whether he really would go back, so they had stopped him in Ellis Island. But he did go back, maybe foolishly, but then the plan was the following year my mother would come to America to visit my brother. They would alternate from year to year so that the separation would not be complete. But that part of the story never transpired. My mother did not come to America to visit, and my brother went to school here. And
So tell me about the events leading up to the transport.
my transport. Well, almost, is it 60, almost, I'm trying to remember. This is November 2003. The Kristallnacht, Crystal Night, occurred on November the 9th, 1938. And so it is now almost exactly 65 years as we speak here, since the Kristallnacht. Many Jews, males were carted off to the concentration camps. And my father luckily escaped. He was on the morning following the Kristallnacht, was at the railroad station on a journey. He was executor of an estate in another town and was on the train. The smoke everywhere, the synagogues were burning. including the Essen synagogue, which was a beautiful structure. And he was on the train to Hanover. When he got to Hanover, he called and wanted to come back, and my mother said, "No, stay away." But my father, he said, "If they want to arrest me, I want to be there. This is the German legal training." But he did stay away, and he escaped. However, in the morning, while he was gone, the Gestapo came into our house, came to my bedroom with my mother, looking for guns and weapons, apparently. And I recall now as a 12-year-old child, my mother saying, "Look in there, in that closet, you might find some guns, my child's toys." That took a lot of courage, but they left and did not, many people had the furniture were thrown out the windows, and in addition to being arrested. That was this is November 9 or 10, I forget, 1938. Now, I left on the Kindertransport. That, I think, made it clear that things weren't going to get better. I mean, this was the consequence of some German official having been shot in Paris.
Right. They blamed it on a Jew.
Yeah, right, and it may have been a Jew, but anyway, this was a terrible time. All the synagogues were burned. And so my father was able to arrange through a relative in London to find a family in London that was willing to take me in, a Jewish family. And by January 1939, 2 months later, I was on the train by myself, meeting up with, I guess, a group in Holland, in Van Hook, I think, where the ferry or the boat was to take us to Harwich, England. And the memories, the precise memories are not all that clear as to what happened. But I met up with the family, Wise, who had a son maybe a year older than me, and a daughter several years older. And they lived in North London, N16, where quite a sizable Jewish community apparently lived. And what I do remember is I had taken a few English lessons in anticipation of my immigration. And I recall greeting my foster mother by saying goodbye, having confused what I should have said hello. And of course, and I do remember also then, sitting, hearing conversation in the home of these people who, they kept talking in English, and of course I caught almost nothing except maybe because and of course, and I didn't know there was a distinction between the meaning of the word because and of course. So I tried to make sense, but I knew almost no English, but apparently one can learn it very easily, just picking it up. I didn't take any lessons and then went to school.
That'll help.
Yes, and this is a tough, this was a public London county council school, not a, their boy was going to a, what is known as a public school, what was really what we would call a private school. But I went to the school with the masses. It was a pretty tough neighborhood.
Let me back you up just a
Yeah.
little bit. Tell me about the transport. Tell me about.
That is really about what I can tell you.
No, I know. I'm going to ask you a little bit more.
Yeah,
I hope
okay.
I don't drive you crazy.
No,
backing
no,
up.
what?
Before you went on the train.
Yeah,
tell
by
me-
myself,
You went by yourself.
Yeah.
You were 12.
12.
Where was your mother?
They were on, this is a train station, right? And track number 4 or whatever it was. And I look out the window of the train. There's a picture of that, which we
I saw that.
can take a look at. And my parents, my brother was already gone. My parents are there. As the train moves out, they wave and I wave, and
Did you
choo
leave
choo
with
choo. The choo choo takes off, and I don't recall seeing tears in their eyes. I don't recall crying, but I think I and they were aware that the chances that we might never see each other again was very good. And I know when I was in London in the beginning of 1939, living there among strangers who were very different. They were Polish Jewish immigrants, merchants, and they lived a life quite different from what I was used to. And I, trying to catch on, but I know at night in bed, often, was sad and worried about my parents and the fact that they weren't there and I might never see them again. Fortunately, I did. But that is just through more luck. You want me to go on? The lucky stroke, I told you that my father came to the States in 1936 to deliver my brother. When he came back, he applied for an immigration quota to come to emigrate to the United States with his family. And people were given a number, queue up, because there was a quota, the German quota, and only so many Germans were allowed each year. And I think the number was something like 20,000, which was, years away. But in I won't go into won't go into the details of what was happening to the German Jews in Germany at this time. We were being robbed, and everything, jewelry was taken away, and every valuable possession. They made sure you couldn't spend too much of your money. They put like we deal with white-collar criminals in this country, make sure they don't take away the money. Anyway, so here I am in England, but the quota comes close. 20,000 hadn't come up yet, but the British at this point were willing to take emigres headed for the United States temporarily, provided their livelihood would be provided from elsewhere, or they could provide their livelihood and would not work, because it's still the depression, mass unemployment, 1939 in England and in the United States. But so they were able, on the basis of their prospective emigration to the United States, travel to England. And they were also able to pack up some of their belongings, not anything valuable. My parents bought new furniture, which aimed at a small apartment in the United States. And it was all put on a lift van. Of course, everything that they purchased, not only did they have to pay for it, but 100% tax was imposed by the Nazis, make sure they were getting all the money. And then when they left, they were allowed to take 10 marks. That's it. They went to England and had to live very frugally. I won't go into detail how they were able to survive in England without being able to work. I'll just give a brief sketch. Another brother of my father had been able to smuggle out money out of Germany, which ended up in Nashville. He did not survive, by the way, but his money did. And he allowed this money to be used to help his brother's livelihood in England. So my parents survived in July of '39, came to England. I continued to live with my foster parents because they didn't want to spend their brother's money. And then they lived in a small, furnished room with a kitchen and so on.
Do you still keep in touch, or did you keep in touch with your foster parents?
Yes, some, but that dried up rather quickly. Largely not from our side, but they did not respond. So we would send holiday greetings, and they, maybe with a note, and some years later, that dried up.
Do you know why?
No, I think, well, first of all, it was a relatively short experience. Now, you see, January '39, the war breaks out. World War II breaks out September '39. The children, all the school children in London are taken with their schools to various parts of small communities in the countryside, so that when Hitler started bombing London, the children would be saved. And so I had a new set of foster parents, not Jewish, also childless, or childless, not the also part is wrong, childless, living in a small cottage in a community of 150 people, no indoor plumbing, no bathroom, no hot water in the kitchen or anywhere, no central heating, but safe presumably from the bombs that were anticipated, but they never came. And then with this family, I bonded more closely than my Jewish foster parents. And in fact, when I happened to be in England in 1959, this is now 20 years later, I visited them. I had a Volkswagen, and I drove up and visited. And the husband was dead, but the woman was there, and I think delighted to see me.
What was it like to be reunited with your family?
Well, how can one say? I mean, certainly my fears that I would never see them again had disappeared. And, I must have visited them frequently, and London has a good public transportation system. I mean, they lived in a different part of town, but we were able to see each other, but not really, weren't able to, we weren't living together.
What year did you come to the States?
1940. Now,
You came here with your family?
yes.
Yeah.
You
To
see,
New York first?
I'm sorry.
Did you go to New York first? Did you stay?
No, it was, no, it's war, right? England is at war. The number, my parents' number had come up to emigrate to the United States. My father had been interned by the British because the British thought he might be a spy, German spy, and all these German male immigrants, or so many of them, were hauled off into what were called internment camps, but nevertheless. And this is where my old friend Herman Lowenstein, his father and my father were interned together because his parents lived in the same house in London as my parents. So they were interned the same place. And Herman's father was a strong man. My father was a weak man. And Herman's father would peel my father's potatoes for him. That was when on KP. Which my father, I guess at the time, was not able or knew how to peel potatoes. You learn. But anyway, the time comes, it's October 1940. The Germans had begun to bomb London by then. The Blitzkrieg had become some terrible bombings we experienced in London. We sat at night we had returned to London because our parents wanted us home, right? My father had been hauled off. My mother and Herman's mother were alone. So we both, they combined their households in this little apartment, and Herman and I lived together there, and as 12-year-olds. But we are distant relatives. And so the war comes, the bombing comes, we get on the train, and shrapnel falls on the train as we move off to Liverpool to meet the boat, the ship, a Cunard liner, and we were, third class passengers in a convoy with the first 3 or 4 days. We wore life vests all the time. And at one point, we heard depth charges go off in the distance. But as you know, the German U-boats did get some of these ships full of emigres on their way to Australia. That's another sad story. But so we arrived in New York, headed for Nashville. Right, and of course, so we stayed a few days. My father had a cousin living in New York. We stayed with them a few days. This is, I forget exactly, it's around the high holidays. I don't think we actually went to... Meanwhile, of course, I was going to be 13, but I never got to be bar mitzvah. I was robbed of that.
Did you ever do it?
No,
You never
no,
ultimately did it?
no, I'm not.
Oh, we had somebody in here who's
Yeah,
done it.
right. Well, I haven't felt the need for
What brought
it.
you to Tennessee?
Well, I explained to you, my brother was already here, and my father's brother was here. And so, in fact, a little colony of Westfields and Lowensteins ended up in Nashville because of my father's brother having settled here because his wife was here. And I think, quite a number of the immigrant community of that era came here like that. The other big collection of emigres here was, of course, through Jake May, who brought here dozens of the remotest relatives and provided affidavits for them. And, it was a very generous act. And then he was able to provide work for them. My father, by this time, was 60 years old. I started in the 9th grade and graduated from what was then West High in Nashville. And then, but meanwhile, I did, there was a program there, you could work part-time while in high school. And so I got a job learning to be a watchmaker. And I worked in a jewelry store and went to school an hour early every morning, where I could study books, the theoretical work relating to watchmaking. And then in the afternoons, I would go to work. I think initially I was earning something like $6 a week. And when I graduated from high school, I went to work full-time as a watchmaker and jewelry salesman. And in fact, my employer at the time opened a second store on Church Street, which I then managed, and in fact, in part also hired my father to do the bookkeeping. My father had difficulty finding work at age 60 as a lawyer, he became an honorary. They made him an honorary member of the Tennessee Bar. He, gave some speeches. He was, but things were different in those days for immigrants here. So he couldn't find work, just in menial jobs like bookkeeping.
When you look back and you recognize that had it not been for pure serendipitous luck,
Yeah.
you could have been
Oh, yeah.
easily sent to a camp.
Yes, like so many of my relatives.
How does that make you feel?
Well, very lucky.
A little guilty?
No, I don't think, not guilty, no. I don't feel guilt. I mean, I was too young. My father, as I mentioned earlier, was an enthusiastic Zionist and was able to persuade parents who were reluctant to let their children go on Aliyah to Israel, was able to persuade some. And
You could say that he may have
he may have helped.
in the rescue of
yes,
several children.
and including my mother's sister's children escaped that way to kibbutz in then Palestine and now Israel. No, and I think I was too young really to take responsibility for anything I myself accomplished. I shouldn't say accomplished, but anything that happened to me. I mean, I was on a leash. I was doing what I had to do. I wasn't given choices. and I guess I was obedient. I don't know how my parents were able to persuade me. I don't think they persuaded me to go to England by myself. They told me, you go. And how difficult that must have been for them. I mean, I don't think I quite realized
Understood
that
it
at the
well,
time,
no.
but I mean, to have sent off both of their children.
Are you
with
a parent?
Yes, well, step parent,
Either way, though, so you can understand
of course.
letting the children go.
Well, I don't think one has to be a
Difficult.
parent. I think one can imagine
Right.
parenthood.
And how difficult that must have been for them.
Yeah, I mean, and of course we're able to
How brave.
correspond, and very regularly. But of course no telephone, but the mail went back and forth until, of course, then, I mean, between us and my parents, but of course when the war broke out, the opportunity of my parents or me to continue to communicate with our blood relatives who were left there became impossible.
Yeah. When you look back on this, what do you want people to know about what happened?
Well, I think, I guess I am I'm somewhat of a pacifist. Although I was drafted into the army, I served not just after the war, so I was not in danger. I am, my charities go to many of the organizations that try to support children around the world. I have great sympathy to what is happening to children in war, in Africa, in Latin America. I've seen some of this poverty myself, not in war, but before war and after war. Tyranny is a terrible thing, and what people try to do to each other is terrible.
Hard to understand.
I don't know what
No,
am
that's
I?
perfectly
Is
okay.
this the sort of thing?
There's no right or wrong. So
Yeah,
don't feel that
right.
way.
To some extent, I think what has happened to the Jews in Germany is just part of a much bigger story. This is one that has been publicized, and I'm glad to participate in trying to publicize it. But I think we all need to realize that these sorts of things are continuing all over the world, and some are, they're still lucky children, as I was, and I came to this country and was able to pursue a career, largely because of my service in the army, which allowed me to go to college and graduate school and become a professor. So that
And
is.
what do you teach?
I'm sorry?
What do you teach?
What did I teach?
What do you teach as a professor?
No, I'm now retired.
No.
I was a professor of economics at Vanderbilt and previously at Northwestern University. And but all that would not have been possible had I not drawn some lucky cards.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. Can you think of anything?
I probably will.
Well, I mean,
But what'll happen
well,
is
they're
that's why we have
terrible.
phone
Yeah, I
contact.
mean, you know, of course, I don't think I need to add anything. I think,
If you have any-
yeah, I think my story is. I think you can make some sense of it.
Absolutely.